even though Khabib Nurmagomedov is ranked as number one, because he didn't actually make weight, you could probably argue that Tony Ferguson at number two deserves a title shot, whether that's an interim one or a real title shot against either Conor McGregor or an interim title fight with Edson Barboza, Nate Diaz, whoever. So this makes a lot of sense. It would be an exciting fight between Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson. They've both got polarizing personalities, and I certainly am a fan of Tony Ferguson. He comes to fight, but so does Nate Diaz. So you saw that in the Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz fight. It was very entertaining, and it wasn't your typical fight because both of them looked to stand and trade, and just it was a 5-round war, which went the way of Conor McGregor. Could we see that with Tony Ferguson and Nate Diaz? Possibly. They're both very good cardiovascular athletes. They've got great endurance. So you never know, might go the 5 rounds if that fight were made. And a few WWE wrestlers have made that transition. Batista, not in the UFC, but it was under an MMA competition. He went into an MMA fight and won. Also, Brock Lesnar was the heavyweight champion. But when you're comparing Brock Lesnar to CM Punk, there are quite a few differences. Brock Lesnar has a very credentialed background in college wrestling. He won over 100 wrestling fights. And CM Punk has been in training with jiu-jitsu practitioners for a while, and he didn't come into the UFC as this fearsome guy coming into the cage like a Brock Lesnar is. In terms of physique, you compare Brock Lesnar to CM Punk, it's quite stark, but of course they're in separate weight divisions. CM Punk had a little bit of trouble cutting the weight in the welterweight division, and that's no surprise, particularly when you're new to cutting a little bit of weight to a set weight limit, which is 170 pounds. But he made the weight, to his credit, and it just proves, in other shows I've talked about this, the weight cutting issue. A lot of fighters are having trouble making weight. Well, not a lot of fighters, but some are. And whether the UFC should, do more about it, but they have with earlier weigh-ins, or the fighters should put it on themselves to make weight. It's an interesting debate. You can see that in one of the shows I've done, whether it was last week or the week before, on YouTube. Type in Jonathan Pertile, and you'll be able to see that debate about weight cutting in mixed martial arts. So CM Punk had a lot to contend with. He had to contend with the weight. He had to contend with a good opponent. Like, even though Mickey Gall, some people didn't know him, and he kind of almost made his name off this very fight through CM Punk. Mickey Gall was a good fighter before this fight, and he's definitely a good fighter after the fight. You saw him beat Sage Northcutt, and both of them are rising stars in the UFC. So CM Punk, should he get another UFC fight? Does he deserve one? He didn't show that much in the first fight, to be frank. Certainly his mental capacity to go into a high-level competition such as the UFC and be not afraid of seeking challenges is something you have to credit CM Punk for. So probably the competitor within him wants to go again in the UFC, but whether the UFC makes it right for the sport and says, no, he needs to show something in a lower promotion, or a promotion below the UFC, that is, in terms of capital and money. But it's an interesting dilemma. CM Punk is someone who will make the UFC money, but it's whether they want to go for the business side or they want to go for the sports side of true competition. And CM Punk hasn't shown that, and that's undoubtable at the moment. So whether he gets another fight, it's been a while since he last fought, so I assume the decision would need to be made in the next few months, but we'll see.